and thanks for coming. The High Commissioner, as you know, just addressed the Security Council. I think you all had access to that address, but he's going to summarize it and is free to answer your questions.
Well, maybe the best is to answer a question, but just to say this, first of all, this is a kind of general discussion on refugees worldwide. The Council has it in its rules of procedure to be held on an annual basis. We didn't do it last year. We did it 2 years ago, some of you may remember. So this is what the German presidency offered. So I just wanted to explain why I did it today. I focused essentially on 3 areas: peace and security and solving conflict, which is at the heart of their work, but which has important implications, if not the most important implications for my work. I told them that there's almost 70 million refugees and displaced worldwide. If there was no more conflict, there would be no more zero displacement. So that is a bit of a simple message that I try to convey in different ways. We spoke in this context in particular about Libya. I know that you're all concerned about that. I can say more if you wish. So that was the example that I used. The second point I said is that, yes, I appeal for peace and security. We know it's very tough. I said yesterday in another place, peace has become very rare in today's world, and that means that forced displacement continues and sometimes lasts for very long. Look at what's happening with the Syrian refugees, but if you can even go back, the Afghans, Somalis, and so forth. And what to do then? We really need to step up the type of support that we give to countries hosting large numbers of refugees. And in this context, I gave the example of Venezuela. 3.5 million people have left the country, as you know, and they are scattered in at least 15 different countries in the region: Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and Argentina being the most impacted. Spoke about that as well. We spoke mostly about the exodus of Venezuelans. And the third point that I raise is that in this very fraught context, it is important to continue thinking, giving what's the way forward. What's the way forward also for the people that are trapped in this long exile? I made a strong pitch for resettlement, to continue. Resettlement means bringing people from one country where they're refugees to another country. This is declining, largely because of the U.S. declining resettlement figures. But it's not a big solution, but at least some people benefit from it. But I also said that some people may want to return home. We see this in Syria. There's not massive return. Conditions are still complicated inside, but some people are returning, and these people need support. But the most important issue that I addressed is that humanitarian assistance, including in the case of return of refugees, has to be delinked from politics and has to be provided because people need it. And we must help, we must try to create conditions for these returns to go back. UNHCR is not just an organization sitting back and saying this is possible, this is not possible. If it is not possible, we try to make it possible. And in this case, it means trying to get to resolve some of the obstacles to return. That's what we're trying to do, quite complicated in Myanmar, going too slowly, but we continue to progress. The Myanmar government has just approved the first batch of 34 projects in areas of potential return. It's a small step, but I think we need to take it in a positive manner. But we need much more there. As we know, we need for the Rohingya pathway to citizenship, freedom of movement, end of discrimination. These are the key issues that will create conditions for return. We spoke about Syria as well, because, as I said, some people are returning. I was in Syria recently. We discussed this matter with the government. What I said to the government is that in areas of return, give access to UNHCR and other UN organizations, because that access is important for us to observe how returns happen. We are a neutral, impartial body, and we can also help if there are difficulties in a country that is emerging from such a long war. This is likely to happen. And of course, the refugees are always talking about the obstacles to return there: security, lack of infrastructure, but also conscription, fear of retaliation, administrative, legal obstacles. We're working with the Russians and with the Syrians on all these issues. I want to make a final point. I also told the Council, bear with me if I add this point, that I've worked with refugees for 35 years. 35 years. You may have heard me say that. Let me repeat it. And of course, I have seen throughout my career a lot of solidarity, a lot of good gestures to help refugees. And this continues in so many parts of the world, from African villages to the border between Bangladesh and Myanmar, to communities in the cities of Latin America with the Venezuelans. That solidarity in the world, we should not be mistaken, is very strong. But also, I have never seen in my career so much toxic language in respect of refugees and migrants. Many politicians believe that, and I think they are proven right, that doing this expands their consensus. And I think it is very not right and unfair to these people that are fleeing because they seek safety from war, from persecution, and even if they are migrants, they seek better opportunities. That needs to be dealt with, but they're not at fault. It's very, very wrong to use them as pawn in a political game. And therefore, I told the Council, this may not sound to you as something important for your body, but it is. Look at what happened in Christchurch in New Zealand. That attack in the mosques, 2 attacks, I think, in the mosques that so many people died. It becomes also an issue of stability, of security. So I drew their attention to the importance of addressing this issue of language in social media, in politics, because it is an issue that if left unchecked may have very grave consequences, not only for our work, but for the world in general. Thank you.
Thank you. First, can you all identify yourself?
Yeah. Thank you. Alejandro Rincon with NTN24. Ahead of the meeting tomorrow on Venezuela, how would you like the Security Council to address the situation there? How do you think they should deal with the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela? And my second question is, do you believe whether or not the UN should begin its own humanitarian mission in Venezuela? Is it the time for that?
You asked me a lot of questions in one. First of all, today, because I know that tomorrow there is a specific meeting on Venezuela in which Mark Lowcock, the head of OCHA, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, will speak about the situation inside. I focused more on the main task for us at the moment, which is to help the countries receiving the people leaving Venezuela. So today I invited the Council to reflect on the fact that, unfortunately, in spite of the great needs of refugees and of host countries, especially Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, the financial support to these operations is minimal. And I think that this needs to increase. So that was a strong appeal, because we should not think that because these countries have kept their doors open, we should take it for granted. It's the same as we say about Lebanon and Jordan. It's always the same issue. It's good that they are received, but then there is not enough help. Now, concerning Venezuela, of course, I do not make political comments on that. It's not my place. It's not my role. But I do hope very strongly, like the Secretary General said many times, that there will be a peaceful political solution to the political crisis that is affecting the country and that has reverberation on the situation of people. When you ask people, and I was there in the region at the end of last year, when you ask them why you have left Venezuela, they will always tell you many, many different reasons. There's no food, there's no medicines, especially for those that have chronic diseases. But also you hear a lot about violence and violence directed against people. So it's a mix of motives. That's why we consider this a mixed flow. That's why it's IOM and UNHCR jointly that have stood up a platform which needs a lot of support. And inside Venezuela, we are part of the bigger effort. It's been said before that we want to step up the helping people there pending this political evolution, and we are also part of that. UNHCR, by the way, has been in Venezuela longer perhaps than most other organizations, because Venezuela, one has to remember, has been for many decades a generous host and supporter of Colombian refugees. So we were there working with them already, so we're already present, and now we can expand our reach to help more people.
Paolo Mastrolilli with the Italian daily La Stampa. Could you please elaborate on the effect of the recent development in Libya on the refugees crisis, and in this context, the decision of the Italian government to close the ports and send back refugees and migrants to Libya?
Well, we have said for a long time, as you know very well, I'm on record having said that, and the Secretary General tweeted it the other day, that people should not be sent back to a place that offers no safety. And what happened in the last few days, if anything, makes this even more obvious. Even if we have to take some of our colleagues out because they're exposed, it shows how dangerous the country is. Now, having said this, the situation is very complex. Let me limit myself to comments on the impact of the current situation, which I think is very serious. I absolutely support and echo the appeal of the Secretary General that hostilities have to cease, and I told the Council that I hope that they will be very strong and unanimous in asking, in pursuing the end of those hostilities that are currently affecting the country. I say this for obvious reasons, but also because looking at it from my perspective, further fighting if there was to be a protracted fighting over Tripoli, we would see further displacement, including of Libyans. You remember what happened in 2011. A lot of them went into Tunisia. And I think this needs to be avoided at all costs, but it can only be avoided if hostilities cease. We have already seen some displacement caused by the hostilities. And then, going even more into our specific work, all the work that we have been able to start doing with refugees and migrants that are blocked in Libya, especially now that it is more difficult for them to go further to Europe, that work is completely jeopardized. If we cannot be present, we cannot simply do it. This morning, my colleagues, braving the bullets, literally, have evacuated 150 refugees from a detention center in Ain Zara, which is near Tripoli, to one transit center, the only one that we have been able to establish after months of negotiations with the Libyan authorities. But they took a risk to their lives to save these 150 people. If the situation becomes worse, I fear that even these small gestures that we can do to help at least some people will become impossible.
Thank you. Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Regarding your comment about toxic language, I'm going to ask you to be a little bit more specific and apply it to recent statements coming out of directly from President Trump and also the Trump administration officials regarding what they regard as a crisis at the southern border from Central American families claiming asylum. And do you consider it to be toxic language to question the veracity of asylum claims, particularly in the context of those who when questioned, will sometimes admit that they're just simply looking for better jobs?
You asked me also a lot of different questions in one. Fine. No, I did not accuse anybody of toxic language. I was referring to the language that prevails on this issue in social media and sometimes also in political discourse. I would certainly, when it comes to more senior level of leadership, I would certainly invite all leaders, not just President Trump, all leaders, including in my country, including in Europe, to be vigilant about the manner in which refugees, migrants are spoken of. These are people that have dignity, that have reasons for moving, different reasons that need to be addressed in the appropriate manner. And I think that to depict them in a negative manner, or to rather also depict this as an invasion, it has been done in Europe a lot, I think is not a very constructive way forward. It also doesn't provide any real solution to addressing these particular flows. On your other point, which I think is very important, the flows of people arriving in the United States are largely, not exclusively, from Central America, but that's where the bulk of the people come from. And I think it is important, and this is what we have said many times to the US, and we've been working with the US quite constructively on this, that the people who come with valid claims and asking for asylum, this should be, like anywhere else, they should be heard. The situation in Central America is a situation of economic deprivation, which is likely to generate economic migration. But it is also, I visited there, it is also a situation of extreme violence by gangs, lack of law and order, abuses, rape, forced recruitment of children. All the most abusive things that you can think of are happening there, so that people that are fleeing from that situation, in my world, are refugees and should be considered as refugees. Now, I fully agree with the United States that we need to look at it as a journey. We need to try to prevent people from embarking on very dangerous journeys across Mexico. That's why we've been working a lot with Mexico to reinforce their own capacity to provide asylum to some of these people. Many people actually do not want to pursue the journey, want to stay there because it is safer. But if some people arrive in the United States, and the numbers are increasing, we have seen it in the last few months, I think that it is fair to say that the necessary resources have to be invested in that response. This is something that we have said to the United States, not just this administration, for at least 3 past administrations already. Insufficient resources are put in managing a very large asylum issue. And I think that also, of course, you will expect this from me. Doors have to remain open for people to seek asylum. Fair hearing has to be given. Efficient processes have to be put in place. Then for those that are recognized as refugees, they should stay in the long tradition of this country. And those that are not refugees, well, then there's other measures that have to be taken that are beyond my mandate.
Thank you. Evelyn Leopold. Almost all the Security Council members agreed with you that you have to have a holistic solution. But what do they do in the meantime? Several of them are hostile toward refugees. You may not want to comment on the Trump administration, but as a child of refugees, it's certainly toxic. Poland has a very strict policy. Several others do. So are you encouraging them to do something before you can find the root causes?
I think that one thing does not exclude the other. You're absolutely right. I think it is important to help refugees where they are in the largest numbers, which is not in the rich countries. 85% of the world refugees are in poor countries, middle-income countries. They won't move from there. And actually, it is perhaps better that they don't move, because these journeys are very, very dangerous, and they would be at the hands of traffickers and bad people. But that doesn't mean that rich countries should not keep their doors open for people who arrive in those countries, and should not have efficient and fair systems to adjudicate asylum claims. Absolutely. And, we have been quite explicit. This is not a matter of accusing anybody, but in many countries in Europe, we have reported increasing restrictions in the manner in which asylum is adjudicated. Same in the United States, same in Australia. So in many countries in the rich world, this is happening. And I always have a comment to make to those countries. I said, I understand it's a complicated issue, but how am I to tell poorer countries take in 5,000 people a day, 10,000 people a day, keep 1 million people for 20 years when richer countries are becoming so restrictive. So I think when we talk about burden sharing, and everybody agrees with that, I agree with you, this is what it means, that we all have to play our part.
Great. Last question. Thanks.
The question is on Venezuela. They're talking about the situation in Venezuela is going to a way like the situation in Syria. Of course, are two different scenarios on religion and everything, but different countries are getting involved in this crisis in Venezuela. So in the right to protect, what it could be the right call from the international community to intervene or to solve this humanitarian crisis in Venezuela?
You know, I think, and you said it yourself, is not a good idea to compare. These are very different situations, completely different situations. There may be some similarities, but I think it's really apples and oranges. But I think that, let me say this, I see the crisis, plural, through the lens of the people who are impacted by this. I don't see it from a political angle. I see it from the lens of the people that are displaced, impacted, persecuted, killed, maimed, you name it, right? And therefore, my appeal to states in the Council and beyond is for those things to stop, because they're against any principle of international law. And in order to do this, you need unity, because I think this is what you are implying, that there are divisions, that there are, use the word interference. I don't know about that. What I know is that in responding and trying to resolve this crisis so that people stop being displaced, killed, persecuted, discriminated, in order to do that, the international community has to be united. Who can say that it is good to see what's happening to the Venezuelans that, you know, I've seen doctors, engineers selling fruit in the markets of Bogota or Quito or Lima? Who can say that this is good, this humiliation of the people? So everybody will agree that it is a bad thing. So we need to stop this from happening. And this can only happen not only in Venezuela, but in Syria, in Myanmar, in South Sudan, you name it, can only happen if the international community and its supreme instance, the Security Council, is united in addressing this and in pursuing peace. Peace cannot be pursued piecemeal. Thank you very much.